New charges and new fears. Has football's sex abuse scandal gone global? Tonight, the former coach Barry Bennell was charged with 8 offences of historical abuse against an underage boy, while FIFA's boss says the issue will trigger reaction from around the world.
Definitely, we are very concerned about the allegation of child abuse in the world of football, which normally should be the safest place for the children.
And with the FA's Greg Clark describing it as the biggest crisis the game has seen, will the scale and severity be uncovered soon? Also on News at 10 tonight. 3 days of mourning in Brazil for the football team killed in a plane crash heading to the biggest match of their careers. Are Assad's forces working to a Russian-backed timetable to take Aleppo before Trump becomes president? And the battle over Beethoven's Sotheby's clashes with experts over a musical manuscript that failed to sell.
This is ITV News at 10 with Nina Hussain.
Good evening. The haunting scandal of past child sexual abuse in football was brought very much into the present today. The former youth coach Barry Bennell will now appear in court in just over 2 weeks' time, charged with 8 offences of sexual assault against an underage boy. But the worldwide implications of what is coming to light here were acknowledged by FIFA, which runs the international game. Its Secretary-General told ITV News that the world of football should be the safest place for children, but she expects something similar has taken place in other countries.
This was Barry Bennell in 1990, the man now at the heart of football's abuse scandal. Then he was well respected as a coach. His teams were among the best in Britain. This is him a few years ago. He was charged today with 8 offences of sexual abuse against a boy under the age of 14. He'll appear in court next month. The allegations, emerging almost on a daily basis, have shaken British football. The FA has now opened its own investigation. Its chairman under no illusions about the challenge ahead.
Like many big problems, people aren't drawn towards them. My methodology is as if there's a problem, run towards it. Embrace it, fix it, disclose everything that happened. I think institutionally, all organisations in the old days used to protect themselves by keeping quiet and closing ranks. That's completely inappropriate and unacceptable today, which is why we've had an independent-led inquiry.
Today, 3 more police forces, Staffordshire, Cambridgeshire and Police Scotland, said they were looking at multiple historical allegations of abuse in youth football. In the space of less than 2 weeks, a total of 8 forces have launched separate investigations. Tonight, another footballer, the former Northern Ireland international Mark Williams, has revealed he was also a victim of abuse as a youngster. While Paul Stewart, the former England, Liverpool and Tottenham player, said he's made a statement to Greater Manchester Police today about a coach abusing him.
My abuser has not been named yet, and that has been done for legal reasons. Today I've spoken to the police who have opened a formal investigation surrounding this abuser.
As a result of what you've told them?
As a result of my interview this morning.
The NSPCC helpline, which took 50 calls in its first few hours when it was set up last week, is still being contacted with new abuse cases. Today, from the very top of football, an offer of support and recognition that this scandal may stretch way beyond Britain's borders.
We are ready to also provide support to the FAs in case of request, but definitely we are very concerned about the allegation of child abuse in the world of football, which normally should be the safest place for the children.
And do you think this problem exists around the world, in every country?
Well, I will certainly say yes, but maybe the visibility and the publicity around this event will also trigger more reaction around the world. And we should be very open to really listening to those who have suffered all this treatment, not only give them the psychological support that they deserve, but also impose very, very strong sanction against those who have really committed those crimes.
In under a fortnight, the courage of Andy Woodward, the first player to reveal his painful secret, has not only stunned the national game, but has also caused reverberations through world football, 30 years after his suffering began.
Steve, yet more developments today, and tonight Chelsea's made an announcement.
Yeah, that's right, Nina. Tonight the club's revealed that it's launched an investigation of its own into historical sex abuse within the club. We don't know what sparked this investigation tonight, but we do know it involves an employee, someone who was at the club in the 1970s. We don't actually know what this person did. Chelsea haven't given any more details. They have said, though, that during their investigation they will give every assistance they can to the FA, so they'll work sort of side by side, if you like, but they are going to continue with their own investigation. I think it's just evidence of how far the tentacles of this scandal are now spreading throughout whole football. And as I speak to you tonight, but in less than 2 weeks, we now know in the professional game, more than 20 ex-professional footballers have come out, have said that they were abused at the time. So it's not stopping, Nina.
How far could those tentacles go, given what FIFA's expressed to you today?
I think it's a very difficult one to judge, obviously. I think the Secretary-General at FIFA today was very pragmatic about this thing. I think she believes, as I do really, that it would be naive to think that this terrible problem was a problem that was peculiar to Britain and Britain alone 20 years ago. And she genuinely believes, and this scandal is getting a lot of publicity outside the UK. She genuinely believes when former footballers see it, they are going to start coming forward. She doesn't know, obviously, where from, because they haven't had anyone contacting them yet, but she believes that it will happen. We've seen this tsunami of cases that's come in the UK. It isn't stopping. ITV News tonight has spoken to another couple of former footballers who want to come out. So I think, to answer your initial question, it's very difficult to say how far it's going to go. It's not going to stop here, but I think we can say for sure that when Andy Woodward came out 2 weeks ago and said his case was just the tip of the iceberg, I think that's proving to be true.
Steve Scott, thank you. To a very different shadow cast over the world of football now, and the wiping out of one of Brazil's top-level club sides. Almost every player was killed in a plane crash on their way to the team's biggest ever match. 6 of those on board survived. Players may have been among them. Many today have made a comparison to Chapecoense's season this year to that of Leicester City's last one. A nation had taken their unexpected success to their hearts. Now that nation is in mourning.
On a Colombian hillside, the wreckage of a flight which had begun with so much hope but ended in tragedy. The British aerospace plane chartered by a top Brazilian football club was carrying 81 people. Among those killed, players and staff from the Chapecoense club. Police say there were a handful of survivors. Among them, 2 players, a journalist and one of the flight crew. This was the Chapecoense squad just before takeoff. They were heading for the biggest match in the club's history, playing in the final of one of South America's most important competitions. On an earlier flight yesterday, the players' excitement was clear to see. This small club carried so many hopes. In the wake of the crash, the South American Football Confederation has now said it's suspending all activities. Among the victims, the goalkeeper, Danilo, who had initially survived but later died. Also killed, forward Tiaginho, who just learned he was about to become a father. In the club's changing rooms today, the players who didn't make the journey. They are a team we believe in and that people love, the club's vice president said. For a tragedy like this to happen, it's so difficult. Outside the ground, fans gathered and prayed for the victims. There are no words, this fan says. Everyone was dreaming, but not now. The football world is reaching out. Real Madrid held a minute's silence to remember those killed. Manchester United, a club which lost players and officials in the Munich air disaster in 1958, tweeted their thoughts to all those affected by the Colombian tragedy. And at Anfield tonight, Liverpool and Leeds joined together in silence too. In Colombia, they're still retrieving the victims' bodies. Bad weather and questions about whether the plane had enough fuel are being examined as possible causes. A team of British investigators is heading there to assist the authorities. Neil Connery, News at 10.
The man who can safely be regarded as the father of Brazilian football, Pelé, said on Twitter how sorry he was to hear about the crash. Brazilian football is in mourning, he tweeted. It is such a tragic loss. My sincere condolences to the families of the deceased. Rest in peace. And tonight, the Wembley Arch was lit up in the green of Chapecoense's team shirts. The Football Association said the thoughts of everyone there were with all the victims of the crash. With territory they have defended for 4 years now being wrenched from their control, anti-government rebels in the Syrian city of Aleppo are desperately trying to hold out. The forces of President Assad and his military allies are taking back rebel-held parts of the city, forcing thousands more people to abandon what was left of their homes. One report says Assad's forces are working to a Russian-backed timetable to bombard and besiege eastern Aleppo into submission before Donald Trump takes over as American president in January. The rebels had held this area of land since 2012, but as Kurdish forces close in from the north in the latest push by government forces, they won back as much as a third of the territory there. The Red Cross reports around 16,000 people have fled in the past 48 hours.
The eastern half of Aleppo, a city reduced to a state that's hard to find the words to convey. This man's anguished howls of torment can capture what words no longer can. It's hard to escape the reality that these are the final days of rebel-held eastern Aleppo. Rebel forces are now withdrawing to their last lines, hunkering down to the few positions they say are defendable. But they are also down to their last weapons. This fighter said they're facing an array of President Assad's ground forces, his Iranian and Hezbollah militia supporters, and of course the bombardment of Russian planes. But they remain defiant to the bitter end. The civilians who remained to the bitter end had no choice but to leave before eastern Aleppo inevitably falls, scrabbling with whatever they could grab across the open plains as the bombardment continued behind them. Around 16,000 have headed out, the old carrying whatever they were strong enough to bear, and children carrying their younger siblings. These are the kind of images the UN is talking about when it describes Aleppo as a slow-motion descent into hell.
The parties to the conflict in Syria have shown time and again that they are willing to take any action to secure military advantage, even if it means killing, maiming, or starving civilians into submission in this process. We ask all parties to the conflict to restore basic humanity in Syria.
But all the words of outrage, the diplomatic appeals and condemnation have been completely futile, not having a single effect on the Russians or Syrian government or even the rebels. Retaking Aleppo will be the biggest military victory for President Assad since this war began. Aleppo was at the heart of the revolution against him. But Assad retaking Aleppo will not bring the end of this war closer, far from it. What it will do is make it even harder to find a pathway to peace. Too much has been lost and destroyed in Aleppo for its people to think about ending the war. It will simply harden their determination to continue. The same is true for hundreds of other cities and towns in this tortured, broken country. Raghi Omar, News at 10.
There was a reminder today from Syria of the confusion of war. The US-led coalition targeting so-called Islamic State in the country admitted that it had mistakenly attacked and killed dozens of Syrian government troops 2 months ago. At least one British aircraft, thought to be a drone, took part in the operation in September. The Ministry of Defence says it welcomes the report's conclusion that the targets were attacked in good faith and identifying them as militants had been reasonable. You might remember how Donald Trump talked of his relationship with Theresa May becoming like that between President Reagan and Mrs Thatcher. We'll have to wait and see. But tonight it was her turn to call him. Our political correspondent Paul Brand is here. Did we learn anything from this, the second call between them?
Well, Downing Street is certainly stressing that they think this is a sign of the pair developing a regular dialogue, though I think it's fair to say they're not quite on speed dial terms just yet, Nina. This was a relatively short call by the looks of it, though Downing Street won't tell us exactly how long. Theresa May, it looks as if she's still kind of warming up the special relationship. But there was one particularly substantial area of discussion, namely NATO. Now, this is something that Donald Trump has been incredibly critical of in the past, saying in the election campaign that effectively he wanted to pull out of it, that he was sick of America propping up European nations paying for their defence. Well, today, we're told that the Prime Minister and the President-elect agreed that NATO is an important alliance, but that it's also important for all the members to reach the target of spending 2% of their national income on defence, something that pretty much only Britain and America do at the moment. So Downing Street really stressing the importance of that. Apart from that, there was an agreement to meet at the earliest possible opportunity. The definition of that, though, will depend, of course, on the new President's priorities.
One thing we know they didn't talk about was one Nigel Farage.
Yeah, one Downing Street source saying tonight there was no mention of the F word, the Farage word. Nigel Farage's name pretty much worse than a four-letter word in Downing Street at the moment, not just because he was the first British politician to meet Donald Trump after his election, but because Donald Trump, of course, tweeted last week saying Nigel Farage should be the British ambassador to Washington, which caused Downing Street a lot of embarrassment. Tonight, Nigel Farage is still pressing that bruise. He told me on the phone that, you know, if he's helped them develop this dialogue, then that can only be a good thing. His call, by the way, went through to America, where he's having meetings over the coming days. He wouldn't tell me whether or not they are with Donald Trump, but Theresa May will have to wait and see whether there is room for more than just two in that special relationship and whether she can muscle in on it.
Paul Brand, thank you. For some people who can't afford to buy a big-ticket kitchen appliance, so-called rent-to-buy firms offer the chance to own one, but at quite a price. Items can end up costing double the list price or even more. Well, now the financial services watchdog says it will consider capping the charges such firms make, just as it did to payday lenders 2 years ago.
We're making life a little bit easier by giving you the things you need right now.
For those who can't afford to buy household goods outright, there is an alternative known as rent-to-own.
You can switch your sofa to something more stylish.
Firms allow you to spread the cost through weekly payments, but the way it can all add up can lead to eye-watering interest rates like this.
Over the last few years, I've had the cooker, the washing machine, this freezer and that fridge freezer. I even joked once and said, what are they, gold-plated, you know?
Dawn North from Port Talbot regrets buying this way.
I can't even go and buy second-hand because I would have to go somewhere else to get the money, and I would end up paying interest on that money to buy what I wanted.
At the biggest of these firms, Bright House, we found the cheapest washing machine on sale today was a Hoover with basic price £412.13, but the customer could pay £819, made up of weekly payments of £5.25 for 156 weeks at 69.9% APR. We found the same appliance on sale elsewhere at around £290 without credit. Bright House says it checks affordability, that people can cancel agreements and that appliances will be fixed or replaced if there are problems. But consumer campaigners worry about costs like this and want firms regulated the way payday lenders are.
We'd like to see a cap applied to all high-cost credit and particularly these companies, so people know what they're in for and they haven't got this extended debt that they can't afford to repay.
For customers of these firms, there are alternatives. Some non-profit social enterprises are now replicating the buy-to-own model, and lower-cost lending can be available through credit unions.
No deposit needed.
This is a sector that has doubled over 5 years. Their customers may struggle for money, but for the firms, times have been good. Chris Choi, News at 10.
Cuba's long goodbye to its past president and international political icon Fidel Castro will reach a new crescendo this evening. Some of his ideological allies, the presidents of Venezuela and Bolivia, are joining thousands of Cubans at a rally in the capital, Havana. Even among his greatest supporters, though, there is a wish for change to modernise the country, but without doing anything to risk the health and education systems that Castro introduced.
There are ways in which Cuba has stood still since the revolution and ways in which it is now changing quickly. Fe de Valle Park is one of Havana's Wi-Fi hotspots, the only places ordinary people can go online, and now popular since smartphones were legalized just a couple of years ago. Jackson and Bethany are expecting their first child. Like many young Cubans, they want change, but there are things they don't want to lose.
We have here a way of education. We have here benefits in the doctor, you know, and that stuff we cannot lose. It's better if we live that way. We cannot lose that. Pay hundreds of dollars if we have to go to the doctor. In other countries, we have to do that, and here we don't.
I think if you're going to make some change slowly, not quickly, it's better for the country.
When Fidel Castro seized power, a new central bank was under construction. He finished the building and made it a hospital. Inside today, medics lined up to sign the Book of Condolence. Salermo Morales was here the day Castro opened the place. He says the health service, beloved by so many Cubans, is held back by US sanctions. I'd like to give people better quality of life and health, but there are limitations, he says. But we don't give up. Fidel said we're born to prevail, not to surrender. The economic climate here has long been shaped by relations with the US. The older generation know that well, of course, but these friends differ on what should happen next. The system is good, says Sibo, constructive, exceptional. Good because it helps those in poverty. Capitalism doesn't. Capitalism only thinks of the individual and lets the others crash. Well, we have to wait and see, says Ruben. We have been waiting for the future for a long time, and we are expecting changes. How much economic and maybe political change Cuba is in for will depend on President Raúl Castro, now no longer ruling in his older brother's shadow. But also, inevitably, it will depend on Donald Trump, the new president of Cuba's overbearing neighbour.
Well, these are live pictures from Havana right now, where, as you can see, the crowds, the big crowds, are gathering in Revolution Square for a memorial rally to Fidel Castro tonight. Carl Dinham is amongst them. Carl, if America does take a harder line, as Donald Trump has indicated, what might that mean for the country's future there?
Well, this is a very sensitive time for the future of this country, because if Mr. Trump does take that tougher line that you mentioned, the hardliners within the regime here may be tempted to respond in kind. It would certainly strengthen their hand. After all, their default position for 60 years and more has been outright opposition to anything the United States wants. So they may try to slow the pace of reform, which did pick up under Raúl Castro when he took over from his brother, and with his brother now completely out of the picture, it could possibly be expected to gather pace further, although I would say change is a relative thing here in Cuba. It really applies to economic liberalization. This is still, after all, a one-party state where independent trade unions are outlawed and thousands of political activists are detained for their activities.
And Carl, back to the past, leaders of Cuba's traditional allies have now flown in to join in the commemorations regarding Castro's life.
That's right. Along with the tens of thousands of Cubans here gathering to say goodbye are his traditional left-wing allies and those from Africa, like people like Robert Mugabe and Jacob Zuma from South Africa. Raul Castro will speak here for the first time since announcing his brother's death, and his words will be watched very carefully the world over to see what kind of indication he might give about what direction this island nation might take next.
Carl Dinham, thank you. It is more than 30 years ago now since the world's worst nuclear accident at Chernobyl in Ukraine. Today, the world's largest land-based moving structure was slid over the site to seal it as best as possible for the next 100 years to stop more radiation leaking out. The new shelter replaces a concrete shield poured over the area at the time. As well as Olympic gold and silver medals, our star heptathlete Jessica Ennis-Hill has been the proud winner of 2 World Championship golds and 1 silver, but not anymore. The silver she won in 2011 has been upgraded to a 3rd gold after the Russian who beat her in South Korea had her world title taken away for a doping offence. Not bad to get another gold after you have retired. Congratulations to her. Finally, there's been discord in the normally genteel world of classical music over an auction. A major row was broken out over Beethoven's Allegretto in B minor, or to be more precise, a manuscript of it which went up for sale at Sotheby's in London today, exactly 199 years after it was written. But after one expert said he didn't think the handwriting was Beethoven's, no one bought it. Cue uproar, but before that, cue the music.
You probably won't recognise the tune, an Allegretto in B minor that is rather forgettable. Ludwig van Beethoven composed it, of that there's no doubt. But was this particular manuscript, or is it just a copy? Professor Barry Cooper has spent 40 years studying Beethoven and has no doubt it's not his.
These are Beethoven's double bar signs, usually a rather badly written M or letter N. Here we have a similar sort of hook at the beginning, a zigzag at the beginning, but we have this enormous curved line at the end, at the right-hand side, each time. And Beethoven never does that. And I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of Beethoven's double bars, and they never have that. I'm 100% convinced it's not a Beethoven manuscript for the reasons I've given them. There are so many features. If there were just 1 or 2 features, perhaps some of the suggestive ones like the curved beams, well, I wouldn't be quite so sure. But with all these other features, it's absolutely certain that it's not Beethoven's manuscript.
The question mark hanging over the manuscript was surely reflected in it failing to sell today at Sotheby's. It had been valued at £200,000, but now the auction house has itself hit back, saying the document cannot be dismissed by anyone who's not seen it firsthand. They've also branded the professor's assertions as irresponsible, saying a 19th century religious inscription also proves it was authentic Beethoven. A strident defence, yes, but one tonight that is mainly falling on deaf ears. How can you be so sure that is not Beethoven's hand?
Beethoven wrote this 200 years ago less a day, when he was 46, life in turmoil. He's profoundly deaf. He's about to embark on a massive court case that's going to destroy his private life. And his handwriting, always difficult, by now is illegible. That's far too neat for Beethoven.
What's more, it turns out the work was offered to fellow auctioneers Christie's 18 months earlier, but unsure of its provenance, they declined. On this Beethoven score at least, there remains very little harmony. Richard Pallow, News at 10.
Just time to take a look at what might be making the news tomorrow. Just how healthy are our big banks and financial institutions? The Bank of England will give its assessment in the morning and set out any plans it has to maintain their stability. And we've been waiting and waiting to find out whether Gareth Southgate has been given the England manager's job. He was the only person to get an interview after all. We might find out tomorrow. Raggy will be here tomorrow, but from me and everyone here, good night.